Number 10. Mexican cave skull. In a Mexican cave, divers have discovered the horribly disfigured skeleton of a woman from nearly 10,000 years ago. The skull and bones of this mysterious woman were found on the Yucatan Peninsula and were dated to be about 9,900 years old, making her one of the oldest known inhabitants of what is currently Mexico. To make this discovery even more bizarre, the woman's skull had 3 injuries. Something had hit that woman very hard and broken her skull. Her skull also had some very strange deformations that researchers believe could be linked to a bacterial relative of syphilis. And if so, this would be the earliest known beginnings of that disease. According to a researcher and professor from the Institute of Earth Sciences at Heidelberg University in Germany, the woman had a very hard time in life and a very miserable end to her life. Because of the traumas and deformations on her skull, researchers believe she was likely expelled from whatever group she belonged to, then either left in the cave to die on her own or was murdered in a rather brutal fashion. The skull of the woman was found in 2016 by cave explorers, very close to the popular tourist town of Tulum. Like many of the other ancient skulls found in the same area, this woman had a very different structure to that of other early humans living in Mexico near the end of the last ice age. First, her skull was elongated with a slightly longer and narrower brain case. This means she had a narrower face than the other ancient people who lived in Mexico. In addition, she had strange cavities in her teeth that researchers believed means that she had a diet high in sugar. Number 9. Caveman cannibals. There's nothing quite worse than cannibals, and we can probably all agree on that. However, a recent discovery is suggesting that our ancient ancestors may very well have been a bunch of savage cannibals. The skeletal remains of Neanderthals found in Belgium have given scientists ghoulish evidence that not only did our ancient caveman ancestors feed on horses and reindeer, but also on one another. The human bones discovered belong to a group of people from about 40,000 years ago, and they show clear and irrefutable evidence that cannibalism was practiced in Belgium and likely all over Europe from the south of Spain all the way to the east. These were Neanderthals who were on the cusp of being replaced by Homo sapiens. While scientists have for a long time believed that primitive cavemen were brought to extinction by smarter and more modern humans, these new discoveries suggest that they were actually more sophisticated than we thought. Not only do scientists now believe that Neanderthals had burial rituals, they also believe that the Neanderthals ate people who died. The evidence is in the bones. The skeletons found showed traces of cutting, which researchers believed indicates that the flesh was removed to be eaten. The Neanderthals even broke the bones of their dead friends in the exact same way that they broke the bones of reindeer. This was so that they could extract and drink the marrow. It gets a lot more ghoulish than this, but the basic takeaway here is that far away in our past, we didn't bury our dead without first eating them at least a little bit. Number 8. Irish bog bodies. Out of all the skeletons found in the last few years, the Irish bog bodies are definitely some of the most interesting. The bog bodies are special because they were preserved exceptionally well due to where they were buried. The cold and oxygen-free conditions beneath peat bogs prevented decay and caused the mummification of human flesh. Basically, the people who were buried in the Irish bogs became natural mummies. The most famous of all the bog bodies in Ireland is definitely the old Crogan man, who was found inside of the bog beneath Crogan Hill. Radiocarbon dating placed his death somewhere between 362 BC and 175 BC. Even more startling than his age was that he would have measured 6 feet 6 inches in height when alive, making him kind of a giant. Scientists were even able to analyze the contents of his stomach to find his last meal, which consisted of cereal and milk. Who would have thought that this guy was just sitting there eating a bowl of mini-wheats thousands of years ago before he was then buried in a bog? Less innocent than the guy eating cereal before his death is the manner in which he died. Researchers believed that many of the bodies found in the Irish bogs were actually ritually tortured and murdered, and this was why they were thrown into such a foul place rather than being properly buried. The old Crogan man had holes sliced in his upper arms and had been restrained with a rope. And get ready for the really nasty stuff here. Researchers say that he was stabbed, he had his nipples cut off, and then he was cut clean in half before being left to mummify in the bog. And it gets even worse, but I'm clearly not going to get into that here. You can see many of these bog bodies at the Natural Museum of Ireland or at London's British Museum. Number 7. Mysterious humanoid skull. The first skull on the list for today is a strange humanoid fossil allegedly discovered in Africa in 2010. This skull has by no means been reported in any mainstream media, and it's entirely possible it's not real or that it's being covered up by some kind of organization. But so far as the story goes, the skull of this alien creature is at least 12 million years old. That means it's significantly older than any skull of any other humanoid creature found on the planet, seeing as the oldest humanoid skull ever discovered was in Ethiopia and was found to be 3.2 million years old. Even though there are some reports that say this mysterious alien skull has been investigated at many popular universities, there's no concrete data of that happening, and nobody's sure where the skull is now, what kind of creature it might have belonged to, or what planet it came from if it is indeed a fossil of alien life. Number 6. Child warrior's elongated skull. In Crimea, archaeologists have found an alien boy with a strangely elongated skull inside of a tomb. While at first glance this child may look like some kind of freak sent to us from a distant planet in the stars, new research says he was actually an ancient warrior. According to Russian archaeologists, the boy's head had been artificially lengthened as part of a grooming process for young Sarmatian fighters nearly 2,000 years ago. The skull was initially found at a burial site near a very expensive bridge currently under construction. At first, it was assumed to be the grave of an alien. Of course, realistic science says that the warrior boy was definitely not extraterrestrial. He was only about 18 months old when he died, and so he never got to grow up to be a true warrior with his elongated skull. This kind of deliberate deformation was done in several different parts of the ancient world, as when children are first born, their bones are super soft and can be manipulated into strange shapes by tying wooden planks to either side of the skull. Warriors with these kinds of features were seen as more aggressive and deadlier in combat. Number 5. Skeletons at Cheeseman Park. The last place anyone expects to find a trove of skeletons is at their local park. However, just a few years ago, irrigation workers at Denver's Cheeseman Park unearthed an old cemetery full of preserved skeletons. The skeletons were taken to the coroner's office, where they were then dated to be older than a century. Rather than putting the skeletons back into the park for the kids to play with, they were reinterred at the nearby cemetery, but unfortunately their identities were lost to history. The reason for this is that the Cheeseman Cemetery had had a lot of criminals buried in it without any headstones or any records. According to the spokeswoman for the Denver Parks and Recreation Department, there's nowhere to look to find out who the mysterious bones belong to. Today, Cheeseman Park is a scenic place to hang out near downtown. But until the mid-1800s, the park was part of a giant cemetery. The first person ever buried in the cemetery was a man named John Stofel, who was hanged for a crime of killing his brother-in-law. But by 1890, the cemetery wasn't really used anymore. It had turned into an ugly patch in the neighborhood, so the city relocated most of the bodies and then turned the graveyard into a city park. As you already know from this entire story, they clearly missed a few of the bones. Number 4. The rooted skeleton. Finding skeletons in a city park is definitely strange, but this next story tops it. In Ireland, the skeletal remains of a young man were found tangled within the roots of a tree after it blew over during a windstorm. Archaeologists were hired by the National Monument Service in Ireland to excavate and study the remains. What they found was that the man buried inside the tree had come to a very violent end about 1,000 years ago. This is incredible considering the tree was only 215 years old when the Irish winds pushed it over. Radiocarbon dating puts the man at being alive in the medieval period, probably from sometime between 1030 and 1200. At the time of death, the guy would have been somewhere around 20 years old. Researchers also discovered knife injuries to his hands and ribs. The archaeologists told CNN News that the guy had probably died from a local conflict and then received a proper Christian burial. However, the burial wouldn't last forever, as a powerful tree decided to grow its roots through the man's body, and the rest of the story you already know. Number 3. Mysterious human relative. A new excavation has revealed a mysterious human relative. A skull has been found after an incredible excavation in South Africa that lasted for 20 years. After quite a bit of work, researchers have finally cleaned and documented an almost complete skeleton of an ancient human relative that they have nicknamed Littlefoot. And as you can see by the skull on this strange creature, it looks more monkey than man. And that's because before its discovery, it was a completely unknown species. There have since been 4 studies posted in various journals outlining what the researchers uncovered about the anatomy of this new human-like being. According to Live Science, they believed that Littlefoot would have walked upright on both feet, but that she was very close to what we popularly think of as the missing link. This may seem boring to some of you, but it's actually one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries related to humankind that has ever occurred. Littlefoot is in fact a member of the same genus as Lucy, the 3.2-million-year-old skeleton found in Ethiopia. That means that Littlefoot was an ape-like hominin, a kind of middle ground between ancient apes and modern humans. She was in essence a bipedal primate with a brain much larger than an ordinary chimp. Oh yeah, and Littlefoot is 3.67 million years old. Talk about an ancient ancestor. Number 2. Peruvian alien skull. Another elongated skull was found in Peru, but unlike the infant skull we talked about earlier, this one could definitely prove the existence of aliens. According to a report from the Daily Mail, this strange skull was discovered to be nearly as large as its body, and it's been baffling anthropologists ever since its discovery over a decade ago. It was one of 2 skulls found inside an ancient city in the south of Peru. But what really stands out with this skull, really differentiating it from skulls that have been deformed through the use of wooden planks, are the eye cavities. The eye sockets are way larger than anything ever seen on any human remains ever. Just looking at the eye sockets on this skull and you know it belonged to some sort of alien freak. The eye sockets on the skull look to be about the size of a standard human fist. Nobody's eyes could be that big, not even the largest man who's ever walked the earth. Some other strange traits of the skull include the soft spot at the top, which is usually only found in children when they're very young. But in direct contrast to this, the skull also has 2 large molars that are generally only found in older humans. All we know so far is that the skull likely doesn't belong to a human being. According to anthropologists from Spain and Russia, further studies need to be done to determine exactly what species the skull belongs to. But considering this story is from 2011 and there has yet to be any follow-up, it's highly possible that the story and the research have been squashed by the men in black. Number 1. The Screaming Mummy. The Screaming Mummy is one of the weirdest skeletons ever found in Egypt. She was discovered first in the year 1881, and as her name suggests, she appears to have died screaming. However, new research is saying that the Screaming Mummy did not really scream at the time of her death. It's important to note that she was likely a princess about 3,000 years ago, and that this new evidence is saying that she died of a sudden heart attack. So what's with the screaming face then? You know, it's actually not that exciting. A famous Egyptologist and professor at Cairo University re-examined the Screaming Mummy and determined that after she died, her head probably tilted to the side, her jaw dropped, and her face was frozen in that weird position thanks to rigor mortis. The embalmers then would have mummified her very quickly before her body could start to rot. And so she got fixed in the position where she appears to have been screaming in death. It could have been a lazy job by the embalmers who mummified her, but the truth is that this was over 3,000 years ago, so we'll probably never know the truth for sure. The only other possibility is that she was actually mummified while still alive and screaming, but hopefully that wasn't the case, because that's terrifying. Number 10. The Mystical White Deer. At the Seneca Army Depot in New York, you'll find one of the most beautiful deer in the world, the albino white-tailed deer. This is the only place on Earth with a concentrated population of albino white-tailed deer. These deer are usually brown in color, but the ones at this old Army Depot lack all pigmentation. This means they're completely white and have extremely pink eyes. While they are normally found in nature only rarely, they've managed to increase their numbers throughout the last 60 years thanks to living in a protected environment. So far as the story goes, a few wild white-tailed deer got caught within the fence perimeter when the Army Depot was built back in 1941. Because of the fence, these deer were isolated from predators and from hunters. The first white deer were spotted in 1949, and after that, their population began to increase. This was thanks to protection from the United States Army. Because the white deer were all breeding with each other, they ended up creating more and more of them. At one time, out of the 800 deer inside the perimeter of the depot, 200 of them were white. However, in recent years, the total population has begun to decline. Hopefully, the wildlife will remain protected inside of the now decommissioned depot, which has since been turned into something of a wildlife refuge. But this will likely depend on funding by local government and how much anyone actually cares about preserving their lives. Number 9. Hector's dolphin. Most people probably think that all dolphins are the same, but that's actually not the case. There are many different species and subspecies of dolphins and porpoises which are also not the same animal. But out of all the different kinds of dolphins in the world, Hector's dolphins are the smallest and the rarest. These dolphins have distinct facial markings that separate them from other dolphins. They also have a dorsal fin that many people think is shaped kind of like Mickey Mouse ear. According to the World Wildlife Foundation, there are only about 7,000 Hector's dolphins left in the wild, making them super rare. But there's actually a subspecies of Hector's dolphin, known as Maui's dolphin, which have an even smaller population of less than 60. These amazing sea animals are only found in the coastal waters near New Zealand's North Island. The big issue for these animals is that they live too close to the shore. While this would have been fine 2,000 years ago, there's too much industry set up all along the edges of the island. And because these are coastal dolphins, they're constantly under threat from boats, nets, and a disgusting amount of pollution. In all likelihood, the Hector's dolphin will be gone in just a few years, even though New Zealand is trying to set up a protected corridor. Have you ever seen a dolphin in the wild? Where was it? Sometimes people mistake a pod of dolphins for a couple of feisty sharks. Tell me about your dolphin spotting experience in the comments below. Then be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more incredible videos right here on World List. Number 8. Black Lion. Get ready to have all your dreams crushed. The legendary black lion is a myth, and any photo you see online of a lion that's completely black is just nonsense trolling. There's no such thing as a black lion. The absolute closest thing to a black lion in the animal world is the Ethiopian lion, which has the blackest mane of any lion on Earth. They're the darkest and arguably the most gorgeous lion in the world, but they're far from being jet black. In fact, if you look at the images being thrown around the internet of the black lion, you can see pretty clearly that they've been painted black by some kind of prankster using photo editing. The image of the black lion standing in the middle of the savannah is just an ordinary African lion. The other image that you might have seen of the black lion lounging on the grass between some rocks is a real-life white lion just painted black. White lions are about as rare as any other albino creature, and that should be the real story here. White lions are amazing, but unfortunately I'm stuck debunking the story of pure black lions. Sorry everyone, but these animals, they just don't exist. They don't. Number 7. The Northern Darwin's Frog. The Northern Darwin's frog is not only one of the rarest amphibians in the world, but it's also one of the weirdest things to try and look at. There's no denying that this frog is exceptionally ugly, but it's actually a great parent. This is one of only 2 frogs on the planet that cares for its young inside of its mouth. This is known as mouth brooding, and it means that after the females lay her eggs and the tadpoles begin to wriggle inside of their egg capsules, the male will swallow them into his vocal sac. The tadpoles will then stay inside of the vocal sac until they've formed much of their anatomy. After, the male frog will carry them to an ideal spot in a nearby stream and release them into the wild. It's a pretty incredible process. According to Edge of Existence, this frog has been around for probably 40 million years, and then us humans killed it. Even though it's listed as critically endangered, it's very likely extinct. Nobody has spotted one of these frogs since 1981. It was likely driven into the Great Abyss because of climate change and habitat loss. This is because of the pine plantations that have risen in much of Chile, destroying the habitat of many animals. Number 6. Chinese giant salamander. Most of us have probably seen a salamander while wandering through the woods or digging in the garden, but I guarantee that you've never seen the Chinese giant salamander. This salamander can grow to be roughly 6 feet in length. People have referred to it as a living fossil because the giant salamander has watched dinosaurs come and go. As of right now, it's the biggest amphibian on our planet. It's also one of 3 giant salamander species left, all of which came from other kinds of amphibians from the Jurassic era roughly 170 million years ago. The Japanese giant salamander is still around, but it's a bit smaller. Then there is the North American hellbender salamander, but it only grows to be about 28 inches. The Chinese giant salamander lives mostly underwater in streams and rivers, absorbing all of the oxygen it needs through its skin. And even though this is such a remarkable animal and one of the very few giant species left on Earth from before the last ice age, it's been hunted to the point of extinction by the people in China. This is depressing because for thousands of years, the giant salamander was revered and avoided thanks to local legends. But then in the 1970s, when everyone started eating exotic meat and killing everything on a massive scale, the giant salamander went into decline, and it's now at the point of extinction. And this is a big bummer, not only because the Chinese giant salamander is so cool, but also because they live to be over 60 years old. The San Diego Zoo claims they have the longest lifespan out of any amphibian living on Earth right now. Number 5. Philippine crocodile. The Philippine crocodile is arguably the rarest crocodile in the world. It's definitely not an animal you're going to find crawling up your driveway. At one point, the Philippine crocodile was extremely prevalent all throughout the Philippines, but now it only lives on a few remote islands. It's also considered critically endangered, which is the last step before being extinct in the wild, which inevitably leads to full extinction. According to information from the National Zoo, there are only about 100 Philippine crocodiles left in the wild, and that's definitely not a good thing, especially since these animals are so interesting. The Philippine crocodile is one of the smallest crocodilian species. They aren't that terrifying, and they have an abnormally long snout for a crocodile. The males will only grow to be about 10 feet, with females being much smaller. And like other crocs, they eat whatever they can get their greedy jaws on. They also don't lay very many eggs. The female will only lay between 7 and 30 eggs, and it takes 85 days for the eggs to incubate and then hatch. This species of crocodile is so rare that scientists can't even agree on an average lifespan. It's generally accepted they live between 70 and 80 years, but nobody really knows for sure. Unlike American crocodiles that have been studied endlessly, the Philippine crocodile has lived most of its existence in seclusion, and soon they might not be living at all. Number 4. Chicoan peccary. The Chicoan peccary is basically a pig, but it's far more interesting than any pig you've ever seen. These pig-like mammals are covered in bristly hair. They have extremely tough snouts, and they even come equipped with tusks that they can use for crushing seeds and slicing up plants. What's really interesting about these strange animals is that they give off the most abhorrent musky odor you've ever smelled. They truly do stink. And they also live in South America, primarily in the Gran Chico region. The Chicoan peccary is the largest and rarest of all the peccary species. They're labeled as endangered by the IUCN, but aren't yet disappeared from the world. If you're traveling through South America, you've likely seen some of these weird pig monsters at a local zoo, or even scurrying through the brush in a few places where they still roam. And if you were wondering about the terrible smell they emit, it comes from their back. They literally ooze a terrible stink that helps them be identified by other peccary that they know, and to mark their territory. These piggies spend most of their time eating roots and flowers and wandering around in herds of up to 10. Number 3. Rondo dwarf galago. The Rondo dwarf galago is pretty similar to a sugar glider, or at least in appearance. The galago is actually a type of primate which lives in coastal Tanzania. This little monster is incredibly adorable, and it's also extremely rare. It's listed in the world's 25 most endangered primates, and it was only first described in 1996. We've not even known about this animal for 30 years, and it's already on its way to extinction. For a primate, the galago is incredibly small. A single galago only weighs 2 ounces and spends most of its time hanging out in the trees, nesting during the daytime and eating insects whenever it feels so inclined. The reason the galago is so rare now is because of the agricultural encroachment in Tanzania, and also because of logging and charcoal manufacturing. If these animals do eventually perish, it's a huge disaster for science. These little primates are helping scientists to understand the gap between rodents, primitive primates, and higher primates like humans and chimpanzees. They're a crucial step in the evolutionary process, and we need to do much more studying to connect all the dots. Currently, the Rondo dwarf galago is stuck in 8 different isolated patches of forest, and that's not good. It's basically like these primates are living in 8 different apartment buildings inside of a complex that is slowly being demolished. But out of all the rare animals in the world, the galago is beyond a doubt the absolute cutest. It has pointy ears, big black eyes, and a long fuzzy tail. Number 2. Cuban greater funnel-eared bats. Like it or not, it's time to talk about bats. And yes, bats are horrifying. I don't know about you, but they've ruined every cave expedition I've ever gone on. They'll poop on your head. They carry some of the worst diseases ever. Bats also take the blame for starting the 2020 coronavirus in the first place. But they're still animals, and they're endlessly fascinating. And one of the most fascinating of all is a breed of bats in Cuba, currently labeled as the rarest bats in the entire world. This whole species is confined to just one cave. It's even worse than the situation with the primates in the jungle of South America. These bats are known as the Cuban greater funnel-eared bats, and they are in desperate need of conservation. A recent expedition into the cave in western Cuba has revealed that there are only around 750 of these bats left, and they're all just inside that one cave. Imagine how cramped they must feel. What's really fascinating is that these bats were already declared extinct. They weren't rediscovered until 1992 inside their final cave. Fossils discovered in the region, all across Cuba and in the Bahamas, suggest that the bats were widespread around 11,000 years ago, but for whatever reason, they've been pushed back into this final sanctuary. Whether or not they'll survive the next 100 years is anyone's guess. Number 1. Cross River Gorilla. Gorillas have been on every poster for extinction since forever. And just like orangutans, gorillas are getting rarer and rarer by the year. Particularly, the Cross River Gorilla is one of the rarest subspecies currently under threat. They're labeled critically endangered and, according to the World Wildlife Foundation, have been scattered into about 11 groups across the rainforests of Cameroon and Nigeria. While this may sound like a large area, it's only about twice the size of Rhode Island. There are between 200 and 300 Cross River gorillas living in this tiny area in their own little family units. And yes, they are directly encroached upon by humans and by poachers. And considering the volatility of the zone where they live, there's not a whole lot to stop them from being targeted. The loss of even one gorilla has a domino effect that ripples through the population, and it's only a matter of time before the rarest gorilla of them all becomes a memory. And this is pretty depressing, but there is hope. There are efforts to protect these incredibly rare gorillas. We can only hope that it works. And we can only hope it works. Or if we're lucky, maybe the gorillas will evolve extremely quickly and become humans in the next maybe 10 years. That's probably unlikely, but it's still a nice thought. Then again, maybe we can give gorillas all the jobs we don't want and encourage them to join the workforce. Who knows what will happen in the future? Maybe they'll work for Amazon. Number 10. African Loch Ness Monster. The jungle is full of terrifying monsters, and guess what? It just got scarier. In the middle of the Congo, there have been reports coming in of a Loch Ness Monster, similar to the one from Scotland. While it's easy to shrug off such a claim, there might be more to this story than just a bunch of nonsense. In fact, stories about a large, Nessie-type dinosaur lurking in the remotest parts of the Congo, well, they're kinda nothing new. The earliest European explorers allegedly spotted these beasts hundreds of years ago. Particularly, the German adventurer Paul Gratz told the world that he saw a type of saurian, much like a crocodile, but without scales. And that was while he was in the African jungle. Many people believe that in the unexplored regions of the Congo, there's still a small group of surviving dinosaurs. In 1981, a dinosaur creature was photographed in Lake Telly by an American adventurer and his wife. However, the photograph was extremely blurry and nobody really believed them. But the truth is, there very well could be an African Loch Ness Monster, or something like it. A small pygmy village is said to have caught one such beast while fishing in 1930, and then speared the animal to death and cooked it for dinner. But after the feast, everyone who ate the flesh of the beast died. Then there are photographs of huge footprints that defy explanation, numerous eyewitness reports, and countless stories. Yet through all of this, there's no physical evidence to look at least not yet. Number 9. Giant anaconda. It's not unusual to find a giant snake in the jungle. The jungle is literally filled with giant snakes. However, construction workers at a building site in Brazil may have recently found the biggest giant snake ever. This snake was discovered following an explosion inside of a cave while construction workers were building the new Belo Monte Dam. Apparently, the snake weighed an unbelievable 880 pounds. The body of the snake was so big that they had to use a piece of heavy machinery just to lift it in the air. At first estimates, construction workers said that the snake was at least 30 feet long. However, the snake died, and nobody's really sure where it ended up. For this reason, nobody is able to properly measure and document the snake, and so it didn't end up breaking any official records. The current record for the longest snake in captivity is held by Medusa, a female reticulated python in Kansas City that measures 25 feet and 2 inches long. If the anaconda discovered by the Brazilian construction workers truly was over 30 feet long, it'd be the biggest of its kind ever seen by human eyes, and only about 14 feet short of the legendary Titanoboa. So what's the biggest snake you've ever encountered? Was it a rattlesnake, an anaconda? Tell me about the scariest experience you've ever had with a snake, or really any other disturbing reptile in the comments below. Then be sure to subscribe to World List for more amazing videos just like this one. Number 8. A monster on the loose. This also takes place in Brazil, where just recently a man was found dead, his body covered in unusual puncture wounds. Apparently, the guy was a ranch hand who went missing in the dead of night. When his body was found the next day, it appeared he'd been ravaged by an unknown animal. While it's easy to think it could have been a predator like a jaguar or even a lunatic human, rumor has it that a mysterious creature is on the loose in Brazil, killing indiscriminately. This guy is not the first to have been fatally attacked by an unknown assailant. In fact, so many people were killed mysteriously in that region that a cattle rancher was forced to call in wildlife experts from Australia to figure out what was going on. A pair of wildlife experts who actually have their own TV program where they locate monsters all over the world arrived in Brazil to investigate. What they found was absolutely shocking. Near the ranch where most of the fatal attacks had taken place, the wildlife experts discovered giant anteaters. After further investigation, they realized that the puncture wounds on the victims exactly matched the claws on the giant anteaters. Rather than some kind of spooky monster terrorizing the land, it was just a murderous anteater. This was especially surprising because anteaters are usually really docile animals. However, it turns out that anteaters can kill if they need to, and not just once. Number 7. The grinning crocodile. A new fossil discovery for the Amazon jungle has revealed one of the most terrifying river beasts of all time. The creature was a pteropod, and it lived 372 million years ago. Its proper name is Parmastega alidae, but it's known as the grinning crocodile. And this is because it has eyes protruding from the top of its head with a massive mouth full of sharp fangs that curve together to form what would have looked like a menacing grin. According to the report from CNN, this prehistoric monster could have feasted on just about anything. It was an apex predator that loved to eat. But the grinning crocodile wasn't as large as you might think. And it wasn't even really a crocodile. Researchers believe that the animal was only about 3 feet long, and that makes it quite a bit shorter than modern crocs. Another interesting characteristic of the grinning crocodile is that it used gills to breathe underneath the water. Researchers also figured that it probably never got out of the water. Unlike crocodiles and alligators who don't mind roaming a bit on land, this creature probably lived in the water full-time more like a fish. But it still could have grabbed its prey from the shoreline. Even more fascinating is that scientists say the grinning crocodile is more closely related to a modern mud skipper than a crocodile. Number 6. Rafflesia flower. Okay, so we're moving from ferocious monsters to now this, a seriously disturbing plant. The Rafflesia flower is the largest flower in the world, and it's kind of terrifying. This enormous flower grows to be over 3 feet across. It has no roots, it has no stems, and it has no leaves. In fact, this monster of a flower is undetectable until it starts to bloom. The buds will bloom suddenly from the infected host vine, then over the next few months will swell until they're the size of cabbages. When in full bloom, the flower has a massive orb-shaped opening at its center that looks like it could swallow a human person alive. Inside the opening are spiked structures that look horribly dangerous. What's really interesting is that botanists have no idea what the spikes do. It's almost as if they're purely ornamental. Luckily, the Rafflesia flower isn't dangerous to humans at all. Still, it's a pretty scary thing to come across in the middle of a jungle. In the largest of these flowers, the opening is big enough for a small child to fit inside of. Number 5. Sea monster statue. Deep in the jungle of Cambodia, a totally bizarre statue of a sea monster has been discovered. What's really crazy is that the statue was discovered in a national park and apparently hasn't been seen in 1,500 years. This happened in the province of Siem Reap, very near the legendary Angkor Wat. Experts who visited the site have said that it was built sometime in the 6th century from sandstone, but nobody is totally sure what its purpose was. The statue is unlike anything officials in the country have seen before. It's about 6 feet long and 3 feet high, and it's the only one in the area. Archaeologists did not find the foundations for a temple, and they didn't find the leftovers of a village. The only thing they found was this strange sea monster carved out of stone. It's believed that the sea monster represents Makata, a sea creature famous from Hindu mythology. What makes this even more of a bizarre discovery is that the area is not near any water at all, other than the large lake that had once been near Angkor Wat. Any large body of water is many, many miles away. What on earth would a sea monster from Hindu mythology be doing in the middle of a forest? It's truly a strange mystery. Number 4. Cult killings in the jungle. The next story is not for the faint of heart. In the jungle of Panama, a very grim discovery's been made. A sanctuary that belonged to a cult whose indigenous members claimed to be anointed by God. The sanctuary was used to sacrifice people who didn't believe in the teachings of the cult, including members of their own families. It's been reported that 7 villagers were slain by the cult in January of 2020, with 14 other victims being rescued the next day by local police, who found them tied up inside the makeshift temple. In total, 9 villagers have been arrested and charged with murder. According to one of the distraught tribal leaders, nobody expected it. The small village of El Terran is on the Caribbean coast, cut off from the modern world by a thick jungle. It's usually a very happy and quiet place. Most people are related to one another. The commerce is generally shared, and there are only about 300 people living there. The local residents had largely been ignoring the new religious group, which formed after a villager returned to the community after a short trip abroad, bringing back with him unusual and unheard of religious beliefs. Apparently, those beliefs turned violent when the 9 members of the church began to drag their victims inside and sacrifice them. And it's not exactly clear what happened to make the cult members do this, what exactly got in their minds to convert them in the first place, but it's definitely something that you would expect to see in a horror movie, not a peaceful jungle hamlet. Number 3. Giant turtles. On a happy note, the biggest turtle shell ever has been discovered. And if you thought sea turtles were big, just wait. 5 to 10 million years ago, there were giant turtles swimming in the freshwater swamps of South America that absolutely dwarfed anything alive today. And yes, we have physical proof of this. Researchers have recently found a shell belonging to one of these massive turtles, and it measured 10 feet in length and weighed over 2,500 pounds. And if a giant turtle isn't scary enough on its own, researchers are saying that they had horns on their shells to protect their delicate heads. In other words, these turtles were real-life Bowsers. But even though they had spiky shields and were enormous, bite marks were discovered on the fossils of the shells that show that predators millions of years ago weren't deterred by their spikes. Caiman still feasted on the turtles. According to CNN, the newest fossil shells were discovered in Colombia and Venezuela. However, the first giant turtle of its kind was described in 1976. For the past almost 40 years, paleontologists have known about giant turtles, but they could never have guessed that they were truly this big. Hopefully, researchers find even larger turtle shells in the future to prove that there were even bigger turtles that existed millions of years ago. Number 2. Maya shark hunters. How would you like to go hunting for sharks in a canoe? You probably wouldn't, because sharks are terrifying, and nobody wants to try picking one out of the water with their bare hands. However, it turns out that the ancient Maya civilization may have had the opposite idea. We've always known that the Maya were obsessed with sharks. You can find images of sharks in almost every Mayan city from Mexico to Guatemala. But this endless fascination with sharks has actually confused researchers for a long time. Mainly because it didn't make sense that tribes living inland had adequate knowledge of sharks. But new evidence is saying that the coastal Maya probably hunted sharks, then traded their parts to different tribes that didn't have access to ocean fishing. And it's also likely that the coastal Maya journeyed into the jungle with stories of sharks, passing along their knowledge of these horrifying monsters to others, who then went and drew them on every piece of rock possible. Even more interesting is the theory that says the Mayas discovered the megalodon hundreds of years before popular science. Most researchers agree that fossilized megalodon teeth were discovered by the Maya, and they interpreted the teeth as being from a giant shark that had only one huge tooth. Number 1. A dog-sized spider. Hunting sharks might sound scary, but that's one of those activities you'd really have to put in a lot of effort to do. However, it doesn't take much effort at all to walk through the jungle and discover a spider the size of a dog. But that's exactly what happened to Peter Naskreki when taking a leisurely walk in Guyana. According to a report from Live Science, he heard something rustling beside the trail as if running towards him. He quickly turned his flashlight, expecting to see a small rat or possum come flying out of the trees. But instead, he was looking at a spider the size of a dog. Of course, this could only be the Goliath bird-eater spider, labeled the largest spider in the world by the Guinness World Records. This thing has a leg span of about 12 inches, and this spider can weigh about 6 ounces. Scientists have known about the spider for a really long time, but that doesn't make stumbling upon it any less frightening. Peter is actually a scientist working in South America, and claims that these spiders are so rare that he's only spotted one 3 times. And while not immediately dangerous, they do make an incredible sound when moving through the brush, loud and dense like a horse's hooves smashing into the dirt. They're also able to send out a cloud of super sharp hairs with microscopic barbs on them, which can stick into your eyeballs or your mucous membranes and cause extreme pain and itchiness. It's like the worst kind of pocket sand. Number 11. Scathing Albert Einstein letter. When it comes to Albert Einstein, he's one of the men who helped define the world in terms of math, science, and genius. He was honestly that good, and if you have something associated with him, you're gonna be making a lot of money. What might surprise you, though, is that the item that came onto eBay wasn't just a letter. It was a letter he wrote back in 1954. It was to Jewish philosopher Eric Gutkind, in which he defended his views on ethics, religion, and human nature. This shows just how passionate Albert Einstein was about these things, in that he wouldn't bend just because someone felt they had a better understanding of things than he did. Decades later, it showed up on eBay and it sold for $3,100,000. Yes, it really went for that. And while I can understand the desire to have this unique piece of history, why did it only jump $100 from the starting price? It seemed like a drop in the bucket compared to the $3 million that the bidding started at. That, in essence, is the mystery that is eBay. Number 10. Guinea pig armor. This one is not just very real, it's very surprising in a variety of ways. You see, someone went and made handcrafted guinea pig armor, which honestly means someone is really good with their hands, but that's besides the point. Anyway, after making this armor and putting an actual guinea pig in it, they put it up on eBay, where various news sites got eyes on it. But at first, no one was really bidding, because the best bid was $305. Of course, this was far from the record holder, as you might guess, but no less than 2 weeks later, someone bought the armor for $24,300. Yeah, that really happened. In the course of 10 days, the armor had gotten nearly 50 potential buyers, making over 156 bids. Now, before you think that this is super crazy, and I admit it kind of is, there's one big catch to this. According to the product's description, 100% of those profits would go towards Metropolitan Guinea Pig Rescue, a non-profit organization in Virginia dedicated to rescuing, rehabilitating, and finding new homes for unwanted guinea pigs. So while it is crazy that someone spent almost 25 grand on a new piece of guinea pig armor, the money sure went to a good cause. Number 9. The original Hollywood sign. When you go to Los Angeles, there are many iconic landmarks that are waiting for you to go and visit them. One of the biggest and most famous is the Hollywood sign that people have been gazing at for generations via their personal visits to LA or via movies and TV shows based in LA. Anyway, something that a lot of people forget is that the legendary sign isn't the one that's been there forever. Built in 1923 as a real estate gimmick, the maiden set of oversized Hollywood letters overlooked Los Angeles until it was replaced by a newer group in 1978. Of course, that makes sense when you think about it, especially with the popularity of Hollywood blowing up over the decades. The person who owned the original decided to sell it off in 2005 on, yes, eBay, and they asked $300,000 for it, which they got and then some, as the letters finally sold for $450,400. I hope the winning bidder has exciting plans for it, said the sign's previous owner, Dan Bliss. Whether they did or not is unknown, but without a doubt, they have a conversation starter every time someone comes to their place. Although they better have a pretty big place, because that's a huge sign to display inside a home. Have you ever bought or sold something strange or unique on eBay? Perhaps a collectible or an antique? Let me know what was the strangest thing you've ever dealt with in an online auction. Post about it in the comments below. Then be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, because there are loads more amazing videos coming out right here all the time, and you don't want to miss them. So click subscribe now. Number 8. A camera used by Usain Bolt. One of the reasons that eBay gets a bad reputation is that people will put random and sometimes silly items that are related to celebrities in a loose way, and then they'll go and sell them and make a fortune doing it. Case in point, during the 2012 London Olympics, Usain Bolt had just won gold in the 200-meter dash. Photographers were on the sidelines naturally taking his picture, and one of them was Swedish man Jimmy Wickstrom. Usain went to Jimmy, grabbed his camera, took some shots of his fellow athletes, then the crowd, and to really seal the deal, he etched his name into the camera via a screwdriver and then gave it back to Jimmy. Instead of cherishing the item forever like most would have done, he put it on eBay. And the price he got for the camera? $11,600. Now on the plus side, the money he got went to charity, even getting Usain in on the deal to help make it even more memorable. But seriously, a camera that was only used by Usain once? It's not exactly the coolest way to spend 11 grand, even if it is for charity. It just doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but then again, when it comes to unique collectibles, it doesn't really have to make sense to me, it just has to make sense to the person paying the money. Number 7. Martian meteorite. Depending on how knowledgeable you are about space, you know that the Earth is constantly and consistently being pelted with rocks known as meteorites, right? Most times we don't have to worry about them because they're small enough to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. However, sometimes they crash on Earth, and people go and find them, examine them, and sometimes sell them. They can go for thousands of dollars on the internet. But there's an even rarer kind of meteorite, one from Mars. While there are tens of thousands of regular meteorites, only 132-ish are known to have come from Mars, and thus they are much more valuable. One such meteorite was sold back in 2013, and it got $450,000. This might seem dumb or even trivial, but think about it on a grand scale. This is the closest that person is likely to get to Mars in their entire lifetime. Because even with NASA and SpaceX preparing to go to Mars within this decade, that doesn't mean the buyer will be along for the ride. So this is their shot to touch Mars without actually touching Mars. Number 6. Coke cans. The other reason that eBay is a rather notorious place is that sometimes people sell everyday items on there and sometimes they make a whole lot of cash doing it. Such as with Coca-Cola cans. And yes, this is a real thing. And it's got a much bigger following than you're expecting, I promise. Because if you met a Coke collector, as in the drink, you'll find they have a deep knowledge of the brand and are always on the lookout for rare cans. So what defines rare? The vintage, the age of the can, whether it's a metal can or a glass bottle, that kind of thing. But the biggest one is the factory error cans, whereby some mistake was made in the process, and a Coke can is made with little to no fluid actually in it, despite the fact that it's sealed up. You'll find these all over eBay at times because a lot of people want them. They can sell for thousands of dollars to the die-hard collectors because they know that these kinds of errors are rare. But for the rest of us, most of us would just get confused and be like, can I get a Coke I can actually drink? This one's empty. Number 5. The Tuscan village of Prataricia. This one might seem fake at first, but it's honestly real. 22 miles east of Florence, Prataricia is a Tuscan village that has about 25 homes filling up 20 acres of land. The owner of the land, a real estate agency, was trying to dump the land for years, but for whatever reason, they were never able to get a deal done. So in their desperation, they went to eBay to solve their problems. And it did and didn't solve them. On one hand, they did indeed sell the property, which is good, but they were asking $3 million for it and they only got $1.9 million. Still, considering all the stress they were under to get it, they likely were just happy to have made about 2/3 of what they wanted. Number 4. Andrew Fisher's forehead. What would you do to get the money you needed to go to college? For most of us, we'd work hard, get a job, get some loans if needed, etc. But for Andrew Fisher, he wanted the money so badly that he decided to go and sell his forehead in regard to putting an ad on it via a tattoo. Yes, this happened, and it's one of the most viral things to ever happen on Facebook. He did a very public auction and offered his headspace to any brand that would pay enough. Sure enough, SnoreStop paid over $37,000 to have their brand tattooed on his forehead. Now, before you freak out and call this man an idiot, which he technically is, I guess either way, the deal was made very clear that the tattoo would only be on his head for 30 days, which made it all the more curious that SnoreStop would pay $37,000 for it given it wouldn't be there forever. Ironically and sadly, this notion inspired a movement of people going and selling their foreheads as ad space, and at times it got really dumb. So if you see any of these people, you can go and blame Andrew Fisher for that. Number 3. Crash debris. If I was to tell you that someone went onto eBay to buy debris from a car that was in an accident, you'd probably say something along the lines of, wow, people are stupid. And yes, some people are. But this particular crash debris was honestly special, as it was the debris from a crash that contained Prince William of the English royal family. One day he didn't see a car as he was pulling out of his estate, and he hit another car that had 2 women and a baby in it. When people found debris from the wreck, they went and put it up on eBay, and it reached over 65,000 pounds, just for plastic parts from the car. This shows just how loving and loyal some royal family enthusiasts are, though it should be noted the money all went to charity. Number 2. Justin Bieber's milk glass. Anyone who knows a fan of Justin Bieber knows that they are a passionate bunch, so much so that anything associated with him is worth a fortune if they can find the right fans. And of course, one hotel seemed to understand this quite well. In fact, during a tour of the UK, Bieber entered a hotel pub and got a meal with a glass of milk on the side. One hotel staffer recognized Bieber, took a picture of him with the glass, and then saved the glass so she could sell it. She started the bids at less than $1, and it ended up selling for over 80 grand. Just as weird though, she didn't wash the glass because she knew that fans would want to feel Bieber on it, and thus that made it more valuable. And the kicker? She donated 10% of the purchase to an animal shelter, which may sound nice, but 10% isn't a lot when you think about what she sold it for. Number 1. An entire life. And no, this isn't as dark as you might think it sounds. Let me explain. A man named Ian Usher was at a low point in his life. He had gotten a divorce and was so grief-stricken with all the reminders of his ex-wife and his life with her that he decided he and that life had to go, wholesale. So he put his house, car, jet ski, and even job and friends up for auction on eBay. Naturally, this story was so insane, it got worldwide attention, and it was eventually all bought for $400,000. After getting the money and not having anything else tying him down, he went and traveled the world, bought a Caribbean island for himself, found a new love, and even sold his story to Disney. Bet you didn't think eBay would change lives like this, huh? Thanks for watching. What did you think of these items that people have spent a lot of money on? Which ones do you think were worth the price? Which ones do you feel were dumb and that people kind of wasted their money? You let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to World List, and I'll see you next time on the channel.